Well, for those of you who were expecting Carl Braley, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Carl, I'm Melinda Montgomery. I'm the Vice President of the Northeast Chapter. Our President, Carl Braley, is undertaking some TSA K-9 qualification issues today. So he needed to be a part of that. So I am your pale substitute. Today we have a wonderful D&I summit brought to you by our D&I committee. It is June, so please happy Pride Month. And for those of you who are currently serving or who have served, happy belated Memorial Day. Little bit of housekeeping because we are going to rock and roll. We got to get this started. We got a full packed day. Little bit of housekeeping. Everyone will remain on mute. Please type your questions in the chat. The speakers and the moderators will determine whether or not they interject questions throughout the speaking presentation. There could be time at the end for questions and answers. This is also, I remind you that this is being recorded and that the recording will be made available pretty soon after this summit. So thank you for joining us. We especially appreciate the attendance of so many of our past presidents, our EC members, and our board of directors. I'd also be remiss to not fully acknowledge our summit sponsor today, DY Consultants. DY, Dennis and his team are great friends to the chapter. Thank you so much for your support. And with that, we have a great commercial to show you from DY Consultants. Here we go.
DY Consultants, we're no stranger to challenges. Since 1991, it's been the mission of DY Consultants to always stand by your side through any circumstances. We're all in this together, so we understand what you're going through, and we're here to help you strategize, reorganize, and push forward, even if pushing forward means starting over. We began our journey working with small airports in New Jersey, guiding them through the process of working with the FAA and beyond. After 3 decades, we carry that dedication in providing consulting, planning, and engineering services to some of the largest and busiest airports in the world. As one of the 100 fastest growing AEC firms in the US, we offer practical and economical solutions to hundreds of airports, saving airports millions of dollars in capital costs and operating expenses. We approach each project with an open mind and a sense of passion. Our diverse team is personable and flexible, providing a unique perspective to problem solving with creativity. We strive to keep you at the forefront of the industry by utilizing the most innovative technologies and resources. To us, caring means never letting clients fall and never accepting anything less than the best, even during the most difficult circumstances. We were there for you in 1991. We're here for you now, and we'll continue to be here for you in the future. DY Consultants, innovative planning and engineering solutions. DY Consult.
All right, very good. Thank you again to DY Consultants. Without your financial support, we couldn't do what we do, and we couldn't bring you this quality programs as some value-added benefits to your membership. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our DE&I committee chairperson, the dynamic, the one, the only, Oppie Applingham.
Thank you, Melinda. Good morning and happy Pride Month, everyone. It's good to see so many familiar faces and new faces too. I love to see some new faces around here. This is the Northeast Chapter's second DE&I Summit this year. We have a few more planned for the rest of the year, including one next month, so stay tuned for details on those. Today's summit recognizes and celebrates Pride Month. Pride Month is celebrated each year in the month of June to honor the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Manhattan, which was a tipping point for the gay liberation movement in the United States. Today's summit features experts, trailblazers, and voices from the LGBTQ+ community. It was important that this chapter provided this space for today's dialogue because all of our workplaces and our airports is comprised of members of the LGBTQ+ community. So we wanted to make sure that we had a platform here with one of our summits for Pride Month. So we're gonna start with a couple of presentations and conclude with a great panel discussion. I'm so excited about all of our speakers and presenters. We do wanna hear from you. Like Melinda says, during the speaking part, please stay on mute, but type in your questions or comments in the chat box. We're going to be monitoring the chat box, and if something relevant comes up to that person speaking, we'll definitely ask them to answer those questions. Without further ado, to kick us off, joining us from the Mazzoni Center is Brenda Klitsch with an LGBTQ1 presentation. Before she starts, I do want to introduce her because she has a great bio. So Brenda Klitsch is the staff attorney at Mazzoni Center's Legal Services Program. Mazzoni Center's Legal Services Program, based in Philadelphia, provides direct legal services to LGBTQ individuals and families as part of its mission to provide comprehensive health and wellness services to the LGBTQ community. In addition to providing information, advice, and direct representation to low-income members of the LGBTQ community, Brenda regularly presents on topics including, like today, LGBTQ 101, Know Your Rights, and legal name changes. Brenda, who's currently admitted to legal practice in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, holds a JD from George Washington University Law School and a BA from Hampshire College. Brenda, thank you for joining the Northeast Chapter's DE&I Summit. We're really fortunate to have you here today to present on LGBTQ 101. Megan is going to be pulling up your presentation, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Abby, for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. So again, my name is Brenda Klitsch. My pronouns are both she, her, and they, them. I'm the staff attorney at Mazzoni Center Legal Services. Not presenting today, but who also helped with this presentation, one of our current summer interns, Emma Martin, a 2L at Rutgers Law School, is also joining us, but just as an observer. But she did a lot of research for this, so thank you to her. Little bit of an introduction. You heard me just say my name and pronouns, and that's a standard way of introducing ourselves in this community. If anyone wants to, totally up to you, if you could just put in the chat what level of experience you think you have working with the LGBTQ community on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being a little, 10 being a lot. That might be interesting for us to look at, but it's totally optional. And if you could also put in the chat just one thing you hope to get from this presentation, that might also be a great way to introduce yourself. We're now on slide 3 now. So a couple expectations and basic agreements. Some of the things that you hear today may be confidential, but I'll be really frank. Anything that I share with you is not confidential. Anything I share about myself personally, not confidential, so you can share. But keep in mind that if you are in an environment where you're talking with folks who are part of the LGBTQ community, some of the things they share may not be things that they want you to share with others. So always think about that. One thing you absolutely should share with other folks is terminology, best practices, and the concepts that you learned in groups such as this. Next slide. One person speaks at a time. We're just respectful of each other, and I think that's going to be just fine with this group. And just please avoid generalizations and stereotypes. And if you're not sure what that includes in this presentation, when we get to the Q&A, I encourage you to ask questions that you have, whatever questions those are. If you ask a question that is, let's say a question that maybe is rude or you shouldn't ask, I'll politely tell you, but this is a space where you can ask those so that you can learn. This is a safe space for you to learn. So our goals on the next slide, we're going to introduce familiarity with terminology related to LGBTQ people, give a better understanding of our experience, a better understanding of the challenges that folks face in the legal and court systems, and hopefully you'll leave with a better understanding and some resources and strategies for working with LGBTQ people. Concepts and terminology. It's not necessarily true that everyone knows what even the words in LGBT mean. And there's also extended ways of phrasing that. Sometimes you might see LGBTQ, LGBTQI, LGBTQIA+. You might even see LGBTQIAA. It gets pretty extensive in some ways, and we'll get into that a little bit. Let's talk about sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. So there are all sorts of words that people use to describe that. In the LGBT acronym, we have lesbian, gay, bisexual. Gender identity. Gender identity is the gender that an individual identifies with. For example, man, woman, non-binary. And people describe those in different ways as well. And that's usually covered by the T in LGBT, transgender, which is a very broad umbrella term. And not everybody that might fit under that umbrella even uses that term for themselves. Gender expression is the way a person expresses themselves. A woman might dress in a very masculine way. A man might dress in a very feminine way. That doesn't mean that that person isn't a woman because she dresses masculinely. It's just the way she expresses her gender. And what is gender? Gender is our inherent sense of who we are. It's hard to quantify. It's hard to describe sometimes. For many people, it's not hard at all. For many people, it's a very simple binary choice. But for some, it's more complicated. So let's look at some of those words more closely. LGBTQIA. L is for lesbian, a woman who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to other women. Gay refers, sometimes it's used primarily for gay men, but it's really a person of any gender who is attracted to members of the same gender. Bisexual is a person who's emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to more than one sex, gender, or gender identity. There are more than two. So a bisexual person might be attracted to men and women. They might be attracted to men and non-binary people, some other combination, or any combination. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, transgender is a person whose gender does not match the gender that was assigned to them at birth. But that doesn't necessarily, again, mean that they use that term. The Q is usually for queer. That's a term that your parents might have told you is not a term that you should be using. That's what my mother taught me. But it's a term that's been reclaimed by the community. And I'll be really frank, not everyone in the community uses it. Some folks in the community agree with their parents. It's a slur. If you are not a member of the community, you should not use that term unless someone tells you to use that term for them. I personally use that term for myself, but not everyone does. Intersex. Intersex is a general term that refers to biological differences that somebody has in their anatomy or maybe their DNA when they're born. Older terms for this include things like hermaphrodite. That's not a term that we use anymore. It may be used medically, but we don't use that anymore for people. We use the term intersex. And about 2% of all people are born with intersex conditions. It's not actually that rare. It's fairly common. The A, there's some argument about what the A stands for. Usually stands for asexual, meaning somebody who doesn't experience sexual, sometimes even romantic attraction for anyone else. And that is a real thing. I promise you it's a real thing. Some people don't believe it, but it's real. And the plus just encompasses a lot of other things because as we grow and learn and find new ways to express and describe our experiences, there are new ways to use these terms and new terms that develop. So we don't want to cut ourselves off from that future development or what's currently happening. Some definitions: assigned gender or sex. That's a designation that's usually applied based on a person's genitals when they're born. A doctor looks at the child and says, this is a female or this is a male. Although, as I mentioned with intersex, sometimes it's not that clear. But it's typically an M or an F. A person who is cisgender identifies with the sex or gender that they were assigned at birth. The majority of people, as far as we know, are cisgender. A transgender person is a person whose gender does not match the gender or sex assigned at birth. And just a quick note, you may have heard some older terms here as well, such as transsexual. That is a term that some people use for themselves. Again, that's a term, don't use it unless someone specifically tells you to use it for them. Transgender is our current term, or trans. And non-binary is a person whose gender is neither entirely female nor entirely male. It may be neither. And I do understand that can be a tricky concept to wrap our heads around. It was new to me when I first learned about it. But all we have to know is that a person is a person to respect them. So using pronouns, best practice, don't assume. Just don't assume. Use the pronoun that someone asks you to use. If you're not sure, ask. If you make a mistake when you're referring to somebody, it's really simple to move on. You're talking to a friend and you say, oh, you know, I met up with that person over by the water cooler and she said, I'm sorry. He said. It's that simple. Just correct yourself, apologize, correct yourself, and move on. Don't make a mistake of being about you. Make it about just respecting another person. Even when we meet people who are cisgender, sometimes we make a mistake. Sometimes we're thinking about something else. It happens to everyone. It's really easy to correct ourselves and move on. Just don't make a big deal about it. And if a coworker accidentally makes a mistake, gently correct your coworker. And most importantly, always correct yourself, even when another person is not part of the conversation. So if we're talking about that water cooler situation, you make a mistake about someone who's not part of the conversation, now correct yourself. Always use a person's correct pronouns, even when they're not around. If you're having trouble using correct pronouns for someone, practice with friends, talk about it with friends, but don't use that person to help educate you about their pronouns. All you have to know is they say, these are my pronouns, please use them. If you need to practice, do it with other folks. Pronouns in email signatures, why it's important. We use pronouns for everything, all the time. And it's important to know what the right pronouns are to refer to folks, especially when, for example, an email might be ambiguous as to what the person's pronouns are, or you're not sure. Putting your pronouns in your email signature also makes it commonplace for everyone. So if someone is not cisgender, they won't automatically be outed by putting their pronouns in their signature. That's our basic 101. And I know that is super basic, but we will invite questions later on. Let's talk a little bit about anti-discrimination laws. And again, this is going to be really basic. So first off, sexual harassment. Is it sex discrimination? I think it just might be. The sex of the harasser isn't relevant. So there was a very now famous case on an oil rig where one of the men was being harassed because he was not sufficiently masculine for the other men aboard the oil rig. And the Supreme Court considered the question within the meaning of Title VII, our federal anti-discrimination law, which makes it unlawful to discriminate on the basis of, among other things, sex. Is this discrimination? And the Supreme Court, including one of the court's most conservative members, Justice Scalia, said, yes, it clearly is. You would not harass a woman for being feminine. Harassing a man for being feminine that's a discriminatory action based on that individual's sex. So yes, sexual harassment very well can be sex discrimination. It has to be looked at in context though. So I don't think the NFL, just for the record, I don't think the NFL is a good model that we should be looking for in terms of best practices for non-discrimination. Just putting that out there. But in the setting of football, it's very common for players, coaches to slap each other on their rear end. That's a very common thing. It's part of the culture. If everyone's okay with it, it's not really harassment, is it? If it's not actually objectionable to the person that it's happening to, it's okay. But if someone on that team says, actually, I'm not comfortable with that, don't do it. It's that simple. And I really hope we've moved past the age where slapping someone's butt is no longer okay in the office world, in the business world. But just to make clear, it's not okay. And anytime anyone says, I'm not okay with that, it's probably not okay, especially if you're treating people a certain way based on their gender or their sex. I'm sure you've all heard about that landmark Supreme Court case last year, Bostock v. Clayton. The Supreme Court made it very clear within the meaning of Title VII, again, our federal anti-discrimination law, if you are making discriminatory actions or judgments based on a person's gender identity or their sexual orientation, that is a judgment or an action based on that person's sex. You can't consider a person's sexual orientation or their gender identity without referring to sex. So within the meaning of Title VII, just to make this really clear in the employment context, harass or discrimination of any kind, including harassment, based on a person's gender identity or sexual orientation, that is discrimination within the meaning of Title VII. The Equality Act, you might have heard about it. I believe it's been passed in the House. Yes, it's still waiting to be heard in the Senate. It may or may not be heard. It may or may not be passed. It would provide consistent and explicit non-discrimination protections for LGBTQIA Americans by explicitly including sexual orientation and gender identity as protected characteristics. Bostock, again, it interpreted Title VII. Title VII says sex. The Equality Act would make gender identity and sexual orientation explicit. The EEOC, I'm sure you've heard of the EEOC, maybe even interacted with it in various ways. That's the federal agency responsible for enforcing federal laws. They've been enforcing Title VII, and they were enforcing Title VII the way the Supreme Court interpreted it in Bostock for quite a few years before Bostock actually came along. And they have stated explicitly that discrimination against a transgender person is sex discrimination, and that discrimination against an individual based on sexual orientation is sex discrimination. That was around even before Bostock. It's not new. Let's look quickly at Pennsylvania protections. So Pennsylvania does have a statewide act called the Human Relations Act that protects against discrimination in employment, public accommodations, other areas based on race, sex, several other categories. And they have interpreted it using the same, it has been interpreted using the same rationale that Bostock was, that gender identity and sexual orientation refer to sex. At least 55 local jurisdictions right now have explicit discrimination statutes based on sexual orientation and gender identity, including Philadelphia. To my knowledge, Delaware County does not. I bring this up specifically because the Philadelphia airport is located geographically within both Philadelphia and Delaware counties. Best practice, absolutely follow Philadelphia's law. In the Northeast, and I understand these are all the states and Washington, D.C. as well that are in the Northeast chapter, every single one of those has an anti-discrimination statute that includes public accommodation. So this refers to things such as public bathrooms. I understand there's still a lot of uneasiness around this. There's still a lot of questioning around this, but in these states, at least, it's really simple. A person is allowed to use the bathroom that corresponds to the identity that they identify with. And that's not up for debate. As I mentioned previously, Pennsylvania doesn't have it explicitly, but many jurisdictions do. Odd that Pennsylvania is the only one that doesn't have it explicit, but that's the way it is right now. So what do? If you see someone in the bathroom that looks like you think they don't belong there based on the way they're dressed or the way they appear, their gender, nothing. You do nothing. You don't walk up to somebody who is straightening their hair up or touching up their makeup or washing their hands in the bathroom and say, hey, what are you doing here? If someone was, I don't know, doing something really obviously wrong, like they're in the bathroom and they have a knife or a gun, yeah, that's not okay. But that's not based on their gender. That's based on the fact that they're carrying a weapon in an airport bathroom. Not all right. So if you see something in relation to somebody's gender, you don't actually have to say anything. And I know that's not the standard in the airport. The culture is see something, say something, and that keeps us safe. But when it comes to a person's gender, as long as they're just doing normal things, it's just like any other person. Really brief. What are the current guidelines for TSA pat-downs and screenings? So when someone actually goes through that detector, there's actually a little switch, as I understand it, for male or female. And the TSA folks will actually flip that switch. And they might have somebody go through twice if they're not sure and switch it the other way. Different body parts might get flagged. So for example, a transgender woman might get flagged for having unexpected body parts. That can be really embarrassing for the individual. But hopefully TSA handles it gently. If someone does need a pat down, the best practice is for the agent to just say, which person would you like to pat you down? Would you prefer a female or a male to pat you down? TSA probably does have non-binary employees. If they don't now, they will in the future. A lot more people are coming out as non-binary. That may be another category that the TSA begins grappling with soon, and I hope they do. You don't need your agents to ask invasive questions to the person. All you need to know is who should do the pat down. You don't need to ask what's in a person's pants. I just want to make it really clear. All right. And let's look at 5 ways to support your LGBTQ coworkers. First, demonstrate respect. Everybody wants to be respected. Treat them like anyone else. For transgender coworkers, that includes using their pronouns, using their name. If I tell you my name is Brenda, I don't need you to dig into my personnel file and tell me that my name is actually something different. It's Brenda. If you find out that someone has a different legal name than the name they use, it's still the name they use. If somebody named William says, hey, call me Bill, please call me Bill, you would call that person Bill without question. It's not actually hard. You just call people the way they ask you to be called. It's really not hard at all. If there's ever any doubt, use the platinum rule. Treat your coworkers the way that they ask to be treated. And if you're not sure, you can gently ask. 2, be professional in upholding community values. Everybody has their own set of beliefs. I think that's great. I am one of those people who actually believes that the melting pot of America is a wonderful thing. I still believe in that promise. And in the workplace, we have diverse people. That's good. That's a good thing. It's possible to separate your private individual values from your workplace conduct. You can believe anything that you choose to believe, anything that you want to believe, anything that you were raised to believe. But that doesn't mean that you have to treat your coworkers badly because of those beliefs. When you're in the workplace, you treat everybody with respect. 3, respect confidentiality and privacy. We talked a little bit about this at the beginning. If you're in the workplace and you find out that a trans person, for example, has had a certain surgery, that's private information. If they tell you that, it's private information. It's not your place to share it. Keep it confidential. If you've heard something about someone, you've heard that maybe they're transitioning, you've heard that Bob has a boyfriend, let them initiate conversation. You do not have to go up to these people and say, hey, I heard this thing. So you're part of the LGBTQ community, huh? No, not a good introduction to a conversation. Let them bring it up. 4, don't assume that your LGBTQ coworkers know everything about LGBTQ issues. Don't assume they know anything. Some folks work with the community like I do. Not everyone does. And in any case, unless they have made themselves available as a resource to you, such as, for example, the way I am making myself available as a resource in this presentation, they're not a resource. Make sure that your coworker actually wants to discuss the issues before you start asking questions. And finally, 5, help coworkers who are having difficulty with another employee's transition or identity. So you are talking at the water cooler with your colleague, and your colleague keeps misgendering another coworker. Just gently correct them. If they're having trouble, say, hey, why don't we practice? It doesn't have to be a big deal, but it's not something that you should ignore. Sometimes individuals, employees, coworkers might have trouble differentiating their personal values from the values of basic respect that we show in the workplace. It's important to say, hey, that's not okay. If it really is severe and it's pervasive and it's not stopping, I really do suggest that you report that to HR and let HR deal with it. And if you're not sure, just say, hey, I heard this thing. HR can look into it and decide what's best. But if your coworkers are just having basic trouble, they seem sincere, they seem in earnest, really, you can help them out, and that's okay. And now I would like to invite comments, questions, anything else that anyone would like to talk about right now.
Great presentation, Brenda.
Thank you.
I learned, I know I saw a little bit before, but I've learned a lot more now listening to you again for the second time. I just want to say I did type in for folks to unmute and ask questions. I'll type it in if you want to type it. But your first question was, how comfortable are you from 1 to 10? There's a lot of, I don't see any 10s. So I see 5s and 2s and 3s and a couple of 7s. So I think you got, we have ways to go before we get to that 10. I don't know if there is a 10, but before we think we're a 10, right?
That's a great thing. And I love that people are being honest about their experience. One way I often phrase this question, for example, for new interns is, how would you rate your cultural competence working with LGBT people? And honestly, if I hear people say 10, I'm a little suspicious, because if you think you know everything, I'm sorry to say you don't. I don't rate myself a 10, and I work in this. I need updates, I need refreshers, and I need to always keep learning too. So thank you for that.
So there is a question. Kiva Rodriguez, who's part of our DE&I committee, she asks, I just learned about a term called dead name. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. That's a term that trans folks use. It's mostly an in-community term. It's referring to their old name, and their dead name might be the name that is still their legal name, but they're no longer using it. Or it could be their former legal name. In my practice, I usually say your old name or your former legal name. I don't make the assumption that people use that term, but if someone says dead name, a dead name is a name that you should not use. It's a name that that person does not use anymore. They no longer identify with. And if they're using the term dead name, it's often a name that might have painful associations. I hope that helps.
Kiva, I hope that helps. Otherwise, feel free to chime in. The second question from Lou Scala, who's also part of the DE&I committee and a great supporter of this chapter. Great presentation. Thank you. Why the platinum rule as opposed to the golden rule?
Great question. I think the golden rule is fantastic. It's a great rule. Treat people the way that you would want to be treated. And I know that we all want to be treated with basic respect. Why the platinum rule though? It goes one step further by saying, treat people the way that they want to be treated. Not everyone wants their birthday to be celebrated in the office, for example. I'm one of those folks. Say happy birthday to me, but please don't make a big deal about it. I don't like to be in the spotlight like that. Other folks, they want a cake, they want a party. Maybe you want a cake and a party, but don't assume that everyone else wants that. And it's the same with just treating people with basic respect every day. There are things that everybody wants, but there are also things that not everyone wants. So when in doubt, ask. If you're not comfortable asking, just do what you think is the most respectful thing.
Great. Paul McDonough with McFarland Johnson asks, is it offensive not to have his/him on your business card or email signature?
No, not at all. It is not offensive to not have it. The reason that we suggest this as a good business practice is to become more inclusive, but some people don't want their pronouns to be on their business cards or in their email signature, and for a lot of different reasons. People in the community, especially if it's not common practice at your organization, maybe you don't want to put your pronouns because you don't want to out yourself. Maybe you don't put your pronouns because you're not out at work and you don't want to be disingenuous. If you are not yet out at work, your pronouns are actually she, her, but everyone uses he, him. Putting he, him might feel like a lie, but putting she, her would out yourself. That's a really hard choice. So the simple thing is, this is a good example. Not everyone wants the same things for themselves. And for whatever your reasons for not wanting to include your pronouns, my firm belief is that it's your choice to do that and that it is not offensive to not include. That's a good question.
Great. Not a question, but a comment, and I see this quite a bit, even to me personally, is that, Brenda, your presentation is great. And can you share this with us?
Absolutely. I have already given up a PDF version. and I hope you'll all get it. And if you have any other questions, my email, I think, is at the bottom, and you're welcome to reach out.
Are there anyone brave enough to unmute and ask a question before we go to the next presenter? Brenda is going to stick around for the whole summit, so she will be here for Q&A at the end as well. Anyone have any questions for Brenda before we go on to the next presenter?
Hi, Appy, it's Kiva. I had one more question. How can cisgendered people become an ally or express their support for the LGBTQ plus community?
That is such a good question, and thank you for asking that. One way you can do that is by doing the basic things that we've talked about here today. Show basic respect for your coworkers. Another big one is to make yourself a resource. If your coworkers are struggling, say, hey, I've done some looking into that. I've done some learning. And if you have questions, let's talk about it. If you see someone saying something that you know is not okay, trying to approach that person and saying, hey, let's talk about that a little bit. That's a great way to be an ally. Putting your pronouns in your signature can be a way of being an ally. And again, it's okay if you don't, but that is one way that you can show yourself as an ally. Just, again, treating everybody the same way. If you ask, if you're asking Jane about her engagement to Brian, why aren't you asking Bob about his engagement to Sean? It's a matter of treating everybody the same way in the workplace. And you have friends, you have people that you're closer to, you have work friends, and that's cool. That's fine. That's normal. That's healthy. But just making clear that everybody is being treated the same is the best way, and educating yourself and being a resource.
Thank you, Brenda. It was a great presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate your question.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Again, wonderful presentation. I think everyone has taken away more than one thing away from your presentation. So thank you so much. Next, we're going to move on to another presenter.
You get started, could I just ask one quick question?
Sure.
I'm in Maryland. Brenda, do you know of any groups or associations that are very supportive and active in my area of the country that I could look to participate in?
Yeah, let me think. Reaching out to I'm going to blank on their name, in Washington, D.C. Whitman Walker Center in Washington, D.C. is, I think, a great way to get involved with the LGBTQ community. They work, of course, not just in D.C., because that's a very small area, but Northern Virginia and Maryland as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And to add to that, Kathy, I'll be speaking in just a little bit, but I'll be talking about my organization, NGPA. We have a local chapter in Washington, D.C. as well that's actually kicking off some events in June as well as July. So I'd be happy to chat with you about that if you're interested in contacting some folks within NGPA and getting involved with our local chapter in that area.
Great, thank you. I love networking, so this is great. Share information here. All right, so moving on, because we are a little strapped for time. The next presenter is my colleague here in Philadelphia. Kathy Padilla is the Deputy Director of Aviation for Diversity and Inclusion. She's responsible for business diversity, ADA and accessibility, Title VI, and limited English proficiency. Kathy serves as the chair of the statewide PAUCP for USDOT business diversity programs, volunteers on the Transportation Research Board, Business Diversity Contracting Committee, and other diversity efforts. In LGBT rights, Kathy has been a key leader in passing non-discrimination legislation, served on the boards of several community organizations, and was a member of the Obama administration's first transgender policy meeting. She has been a delegate to a presidential convention, served on Governor Rendell's transition team, and helped to draft the first transgender voter protection policy for one of the two major political parties. And when I said a trailblazer, Kathy is one of those folks here today. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you are in another meeting and joining us during lunch. I really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us today. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Oppie. And I have to say, Brenda's a really hard act to follow. But I'm just going to talk about some things that are airport specific and say a little bit about some things she might have said. So our agenda for today is going to be, where can you find your local non-discrimination protections or your statewide ones? So, so I'm going to give you a little information about that because some people may be sharing this with other members of the organization around the country. What are the national LGBT non-discrimination protections for airports with the focus today, although I'm going to briefly touch upon one or two things. I'm not a lawyer. Brenda's a lawyer. She may jump in to correct me if I get something wrong, and please do. And I'm joining you, of course, on my lunch break from another meeting, so I'm going to have limited time for some questions, but we're taking a longer lunch break today because we got through our agenda quicker. If we could go to the next slide. So if you want to find out where your local non-discrimination protections are, what they cover, you can go out to the HRC website. I'm providing links in my presentation for everyone, and you should be able to get a copy of this presentation if you so desire. So we looked up Philadelphia, and what do they say about Philadelphia? We'll go to the next slide. Well, we got 100% rating. And we've had that for many years. Matter of fact, we've actually had more than 100%, but they only list publicly the 100%. And we were once the highest rated city in the country for this. If you hit the view detail button, which we're not doing today, it'll give you a huge breakdown of a lot of different areas of what types of non-discrimination or other policies, or, do you have employee resource groups for your city? And it's very helpful, especially because I know some people raised in a discussion when we were planning this meeting, well, how do I show people that if we're trying to recruit them and they're LGBTQ, that we're an accepting place and this is a good city to move to? Well, this will help you with that. So next slide, please. Similarly, the HRC does this for state organizations, so we can pull that up and, you have the same link for it. Next slide. And then we can look, well, Pennsylvania, not as good as City of Philadelphia. Really not. So, I'm just going to call us, Liberty City for a reason. And I think that we have a little bit more work to do here. But one of the things I can tell you about is public accommodations at airports, which I'll get into a little bit later. And that actually, even though we don't have that covered in the statewide Human Relations Commission, we do have it covered now on some of the airport specific regulations. Next slide. Not going to get into this too much, but it's really important to understand the Bostock case and the president's executive order that came out of that and what those effects were. Now, when I say that the non-discrimination protections are under Title VI, some of you very perspicacious people will say, but Title VI doesn't say sex. There's some additional legislation that the US DOT and the FAA has that actually has the effect of putting it under Title VI, and that's how they want it reported, and a few other airport-specific things. Next slide, please. So Bostock can't overemphasize, really groundbreaking. We have a copy here for so you can get a copy of the Supreme Court decision if you're so inclined to read that rather lengthy and dense decision. Or you can take a look at an analysis of Bostock to get you started over with the Center for American Progress. I highly recommend you probably read the analysis as you have a good understanding. Next slide. Well, the executive order really tied this down and directed agencies that they have to implement the Bostock decision across agencies. And there's a copy of it on the White House website that we give you a link to. And it directed these agencies to follow the Bostock reasoning for all of their protections and revise their policies, which is getting into a lot of different areas, many of which apply to airports. Next slide, please. So what are the effects for us here? You've already had a great introduction to the non-discrimination employment practices. So I'm not going to go into that, but it's important to note this is something that has been codified, and the EEOC policy is in my links as well, so you can get to that. So some people would say Title IX, what's that got to do with airports? We have flight schools. So I know that we have them in Philadelphia. I assume that many large airports have flight schools. Title IX is going to apply to your flight schools. And of course, all of us have healthcare provisions for our employees, both for the airports and for the businesses that work at the airport and our concessionaires that work for the airport and contractors. Well, the executive order got the Health and Human Services agencies to revise their healthcare non-discrimination regulation under what's called Section 1557, which does not explicitly include LGBTQ people, even though I went down to argue about that in DC by myself, which, perhaps not very effective. But we give you a link to that as well if you want to read up a little bit about that and that policy. So people cannot be discriminated in their healthcare provisions or insurance because of the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that's a big change because people have experienced that for a long, long time. And Title VI, which I'll get into a bit because it's a bit of a kludge. Next slide, please. So the public accommodation at airports. This is its brief discrimination of what Title VI covers. Your Title VI coordinator for the airport is responsible for these discrimination complaints. Every airport has one. You have to put up your posters about it. You have to do some trainings about it. The airports now, the FAA would like to have you report any of these types of complaints to them under the Title VI provisions, even though it's not officially under Title VI, but I'll get to that in a second. And it prohibits directly restricting or questioning transgender or gender nonconforming guests regarding restroom usage. I know that that was something that was a concern for previous iterations of this training, and really, it's not just the best practice, it is prohibited, and don't do that if you don't want to put your grants at risk. Next slide, please. So this is where you get into how they're pulling in Title VI, but there are other airport-specific non-discrimination regulations. Chapter 471 of 49 CFR requires including sex discrimination in your non-discrimination policies, and they're going to be filtering that through your Title VI reporting requirements. The Airport and Airways Improvement Act, your grant assurances under 1982 and its revisions, also has a sex discrimination portion, which includes now this reasoning under Bostock and the President's executive order. So there are several reasons that you have to do this now. So non-complying with these responsibilities puts your grants at risk. And, if we're looking at upcoming infrastructure program opportunities, you want to be ahead of this before then, because we all need that extra money right now. And the FAA has included this information in their Title VI training starting April of this year. I assume they're going to do some formal policy at some point. So stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. So here's some of the other links that I talked to you about. My contact information, if any of you would like to follow up with me. And if you have any questions for me now, I can see if I have a reasonable answer or punt over to our lawyer in the group.
Kathy, I'm not seeing anything in the chat box. I think one of the questions, same for you, is can you share this presentation with the group? And I know you did send it to me, but I'm gonna just ask you if we can share, because I think there's a great amount of links here that will be useful for everybody to look into themselves and then follow up with you or Brenda if they have any questions.
And most definitely people can share this. That's why we do them. All right. Well, I rushed through that really quickly. So you may have some other questions afterwards. Unfortunately, my time here is brief today, but if we can go to my next slide. Thank you very much for supporting these efforts and being interested. And I wish you a great meeting today.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Again, you have been tremendously helpful For those just behind the scenes, Kathy is the one that introduced me to Mazzoni Center, and Brenda. Kathy was a board member for the Mazzoni Center here in Philadelphia at one time among her long list of achievements. So I appreciate Kathy helping us here with the Northeast chapter on this event. So thank you so much, Kathy. Appreciate your presence.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. The last part of today's event is a panel discussion, it's going to be a great panel discussion with a lot of folks that you may be familiar with and some new faces. To moderate the panel, joining us today from the National Gay Pilots Association is their president, Brian Gambino. I'm going to give his awesome bio. When I read this, I myself was very impressed. Brian grew up under the final approach path for runway 22 left at New York's JFK Airport. As a kid, he was always looking skyward, and by the age of 6, proclaimed that he wanted to be a pilot. After a discovery flight at age 14, Brian focused his energy on his lofty dreams by heading to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. Thumbs up from Rick. Where he earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Science with a minor in Air Traffic Management. Right after college, Brian attained his first job in the airline sector, spending 8 years learning and honing his skills, abilities that would land him his dream job at JetBlue Airways, where he currently flies the A320 and A321. Brian was very lucky to have parents who not only supported his aspirations for the sky, but also stood by his side when he came to terms with his sexuality. He also found the support of the NGPA in 2008 and attended his first Palm Spring event. Sounds like a great event that very same year. Fast forward through a few years of membership, and Brian began to take on leadership roles, which eventually led him to his current role as president of NGPA. So Brian, welcome to the Northeast Chapter's DE&I Summit. It's so good to have you here with us today and moderating this wonderful panel. And I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Well, Api, thank you very much, not only for the fantastic introduction, you make me sound much better than I am, but thank you for inviting all of us here to participate in today's summit. A big thank you to the Northeast Council for AAAE. I first got exposure to AAAE actually at Embry-Riddle with the multiple groups, the student groups of AAAE that existed on campus in Daytona Beach. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you again. And for everyone who is joining, who's not part of the panel, who's not part of the presentations today, it's just a big step to be here, being here, open mind, ready to learn, ready to become a greater asset to the organization which you are a part of, to bring knowledge gained today, to bring knowledge that you already have, to make a more inclusive space within your own space, whether that be an airport, whether that be another organization you work for or volunteer for. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Before I go any further, I do want to go back to where Brenda kicked it off. Brenda, again, awesome presentation. Emma, thank you as well for your coordination with Brenda on that. And Api already called back on it a little bit, talking about I made notes while we were going through here during the different presentations, and I loved how you kicked things off, Brenda, with the 1 to 10 scale of where you fall in terms of comforts with discussing the LGBTQ plus community, where you feel personally maybe as well might correlate to what your number might be of your comfort in working with and talking about and interacting with the LGBTQ community. Thank you for being honest. Api went through a couple of those numbers. There were 5s, 2s, 6s, 7s, 3s, 4. Those are the numbers that I saw across the board. And I wanted to share mine to kind of set the stage for this being a very safe space to ask questions, asking questions that are kind, never be purposefully hurtful with what you ask, but no question is off the table as we go into this panel discussion. We have an incredible group of people here who can answer, help you better understand, help you better learn, and actually educate each other. I learned a lot just from Brenda's presentation there. I'm a 7. I am the leader of the largest LGBTQ aviation nonprofit in the world, and I am still at a 7. There's still so much for me to learn about the LGBTQ plus community, about the different spectrums and identities and expressions that people have. I've learned so much in my time as leader of this organization. I've learned stuff today as well. I'm gonna say you brought me up to a 7.5, maybe a 7 3/4. Thank you for that, I appreciate it. There's always time to learn, and know that being here and taking this opportunity every day, every situation, and experiences like this are opportunities to learn and to add to your toolkit that you can bring through life to really address situations and educate those around you within your spaces to be better allies, to be better leaders, in fact. So again, thank you AAAE for setting this up. Thank you, Brenda and Emma. Thank you, Kathy, for your presentation as well. It's greatly appreciated. Api probably knew that I like to talk. She learned that pretty quickly in our first meeting about a month and a half ago. So it's good that you put me at the end, because we're on a time crunch. And so I'm going to jump right in. We have a great panel and some discussion points to go through with here today. I could talk at length about the pedigree of our panel members, but instead I'm just going to introduce them with their titles, and we'll get to know a little bit more about them as we go through some of our questions today. I do want to first offer the opportunity for those of you joining us here who are not on the panel, if you feel comfortable, join us on camera. I like looking at myself here and there, and I like looking at who I'm speaking to, but I'd love to see others who we're chatting with here. So feel free, if you're comfortable, join us on camera so we can see some of the reactions. We can see maybe where we need to delve a little bit deeper into what we're discussing about. But if you're comfortable, join us on camera. And then you can also use the functions down at the bottom. There is the reactions button there. You can click reactions. You can click raise hand if you have a question. The little raise hand will pop up, and we'll also be able to call on you there and maybe stop the conversation and delve deeper into what you wanted to talk about. So thank you for the panel that's here. I wanted to introduce them. The structural market leader at WGI, we have Marcia Alvarado joining us today. Aviation engineer at Jacobs, we have Dakota Chauncey joining us. Owner and president of AVK Consulting, it's Ann Kleinsork, as well as the senior project manager at McFarland Johnson, Rick Lucas. So a very good morning, good afternoon to the team here with us. Thank you for participating in our panel. I want to say, to get to know everyone a little bit more, I think a great way to kick this off would be to ask all of you this question, and feel free to add maybe a little bit more that I didn't cover in your introductions. I want each of you to share an experience in your life which has shaped your journey, your growth, and your understanding of yourself as an LGBTQ person, or within the ally spectrum as well. I'll kick it off with something that really helped me grow, and Api talked about it in the introduction, was the fact that I had some incredible parents. Not many people who identify as LGBTQ have had the experience I have had in it. And it's sad, and it really breaks my heart when I meet people within my organization, when I meet people outside the organization, and just in life, the experiences that they had when they came out, when they came to greater terms with themselves. I was lucky enough to have parents who were incredibly supportive. And the way that they showed that support to me growing up was they noticed very early on in my life that I was a little bit different, that I wasn't falling in line with what society expected of a gender identifying man. I wasn't falling in line with the love of sports. I wasn't falling in line with playing with the toys that are representative of what a boy should be playing with, or what society thinks a boy should be playing with growing up. But they were very patient with me. They never forced me to speak about things that were burning inside of me. They never forced me to come out of the closet. They never forced me to play with the things that their friends were probably saying, oh, why is little Brian not doing that? They were very patient, and the way that they really showed that they cared was through that patience and through cards. Every holiday, Christmas, Easter, my birthday, I would get a card, and every year that I did not share with them a deep part of me, they would underline at the bottom, "We love you no matter what." There were more underlines every single year. No matter what was underlined further, no matter what. It went from 1 underline to 2 to 10, probably to about 24 to 26 underlines under no matter what, to the point in which I finally felt comfortable to come out to them and tell them what my true self was. And I implore everyone listening right now to utilize some patience. If you might be a strong ally, a strong supporter of people within your circles who you know might be dealing with something, who you know might be struggling with their gender expression, their gender identity, their sexuality, give them the time to come to you and talk about it. Just because you're a great supporter and you want them to be able to share that piece with you doesn't mean that they're ready. So be Eileen and Tony, my parents, and tell them that no matter what, you support them, and when they're comfortable and ready, they'll come and tell you, and then you can celebrate them just as much as you want to celebrate every piece of them right now. So that really shaped my experience, and that taught me a great way to not only be a great person in life, but a great member of the LGBTQ community, and to be a great ally to those who are also coming to terms with their own sexuality. So there's my story. Anyone else on the panel? Marcia, Dakota, and Rick, you can kick it off with an experience that really shaped you.
I can jump in, and I honestly, the thing that shaped my journey the most was 5 years ago at the Northeast Chapter Wilmington Conference. What was previously just the Diversity Committee became the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and panel. And that was the first time it really opened up. And Ann Richard, who many of you know, was shared with putting that committee together. And being a close personal professional friend of mine, I told her I'd be willing to participate in that. And the response that followed joining that committee and giving that presentation, as I believe that was the first time LGBT had been brought up in any AAA type setting, the response that followed that session opened so many doors and created so many connections. And I wouldn't do it in any other chapter besides the Northeast, because it is like a family. But I think the response that followed that cannot be understated enough. And just to follow back and kind of tie we heard a lot of legal discussion for the first half of that. For those of you who were there, you may recall that I pointed out that at that time, just being there and giving that presentation could have cost me my job in 26 states. And that's the importance of the legal decisions and that came out of what we talked about. That was just last year. So even last year, it still could have been an issue. But that's where we've come so far. And the fact that that was a reality 5 years ago, and that was the first time talked about 5 years ago. And here we are today with an entire session dedicated to this very topic, I think speaks volumes. And I applaud the Northeast chapter for being the first one to do it, because all of us are pioneers and all of you are allies and part of that journey with us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. And it's so true when you talk about, like, just last year, you could have lost your job legally in 26 states. So many people, even that I speak to, and I'm sure that all of you speak to, would be like, what are you talking about? LGBTQ inclusion isn't a thing. Everyone's okay with the LGBTQ community. Not in some states, not in certain places. Just last year, I worried about the marriage between me and my husband, whether or not it was going to be continued to be recognized. So things are getting better, but they're not where they need to be. Thanks, Rick, for sharing.
It's Marcia Alvarado. I'll share a little bit of a story that I think helped shape, kind of my role. I've been practicing structural engineering for the last 16 years, and I actually started my career in New York City. So I've walked the streets of Fifth Avenue and Union Square Park and having my lunch down there. I live in Tampa now, but there's a special place in my heart for New York. And I have to say that, being in New York City of a melting pot of diverse cultures really was kind of a great segue to being a military brat, being always around a lot of diverse people. And so in my world, I've always kind of had the level of diversity around me. And I've always learned from it. I've always appreciated, hearing people's stories. I think it was probably after working for about 6 or 7 years that I just started to, as a masculine presenting female, I started recognizing that maybe I had an opportunity in the modeling world as a male model. And so I went down the path, part-time, and putting myself in front of the camera and building up a portfolio and not realizing, that it was going to shape and change me. I was very comfortable in my own skin. I was very comfortable presenting in a workplace environment, being able to build connections and relationships with individuals. And I was good at it. And so being in front of the camera, I thought was going to be easy. And it started peeling back a lot of layers of things that I had no idea that I was going to need to work on to be a better human being. And so with that, I recognized that putting myself in front of the camera was a form of visual activism for our community. And because of that, I jumped in not for free clothes and extra money. I continued that effort over the last 8 years now to kind of grow as a visible advocate, because representation matters. And I never really was a big advocate for the LGBT community because I was an engineer and I had to get my master's and get my PE and put my head down and become, the best, structural engineer I could possibly be. And then I realized, after I came up for air, that there's a lot more to life than just work. And so I realized that I had a lot of great opportunity as a local leader to be a part of a community and to help represent, for organizations like yours to be able to speak and to be able to share my story. And so I think that, the response from social media created so many more opportunities for myself. Likewise, being here today, even though I sit in Tampa, Florida, and I'm not a part of AAAE, but I did a lot of aviation work in my career, and being able to be in this room speaking to executives at airports to help them learn and understand more is just it's an honor, truly.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcia. Visibility, like you said, representation, it is so important for our community, LGBTQ plus community, but it's important for every community. It's empowering, and thank you for being a visible beacon, if you will, of greatness within the LGBTQ community, and providing learning experiences in different walks of life that you have had to share your story and to help further the community, if you will. So thank you. And Dakota, anything that you'd like to share in terms of experiences that have shaped you?
Yeah, unfortunately, my childhood wasn't as good as yours, Brian. I grew up Southern Baptist, so family wasn't a big fan of it. And so I grew up learning to hide myself, who I was supposed to be. I don't talk about this very often, so sorry. It wasn't until 2015 that the Supreme Court ruling of equal marriage really set myself as I am a person now. And so, as you can tell, growing up is still hard, or was hard, and I still battle with that a lot. But that was one of the big things that shaped who I am, and why I still hide it a little bit. I'm in a engineering firm, Jacobs, that really supports us as a community. And I love it there. It's the best experience I've had, the best job I've ever had, because of that love and embracing of each other. But yeah, growing up, that was definitely my biggest experience of who I am and who I should not be is all that I ever heard. So sorry to really dive in on the deep end on this one. Yeah, it still hurts. Dad and I don't talk. Mom and I have definitely rekindled, but and I'm engaged now, so I have a great fiance. So marriage was supposed to be actually last weekend, but COVID postponed that. So yeah, growing up and a lot of the decisions that people don't realize what they're saying, and a lot of things that people don't realize they're doing, really hurts people who are trying to hide and don't really or can't express at that time what they're feeling or what they think. And so just be cognizant of what you're saying around people who you don't know, because sometimes you think it's a joke to make fun of somebody, or even offhandedly say, and I still hear it of, oh, that's gay, because I hide so well whenever I am not comfortable in the situation. I present as a heterosexual, I'm clearly not. And so whenever people say that, it irks me because they don't think I am gay. And I definitely don't present that way, but a little piece of that still tears me up. And you don't really think that that's a thing. It is a thing. Even last year being homebound, I still heard it a couple times throughout the year. And so just, yeah, that's definitely something that shapes who I am and where I come from.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry for the experience you had. And I'm grateful for the experience I had, but also through your experience, I learned to be more compassionate. Through your experience, we all learn to be more compassionate, and it's really it's eye-opening that even now, when in experiences you have when you do go back home and whatnot, that there's still that deep hurt that still rears its ugly head. And if you look at the comments, you're getting nothing but support here, nothing but congratulations. Thank you for sharing a deep part of yourself that is painful. And know to everyone here today that exists for so many people, whether you identify as LGBTQ, whether you had poor relationship with your parents for other reasons growing up, whether you have poor relationships later on in life with long past friends, with broken relationships and whatnot. We all carry hurt. We all carry things that mold us and that affect us in our daily lives. Be compassionate in everything you do. Be compassionate, be open-minded, and be respectful of the different walks of life that people come from. That is all we can ask. Unfortunately, we've seen much more hate in the world, I would say, in the past couple of years, and it seems to be getting worse, especially for me in aviation that I get to see on a regular basis. Even in the past year, the traveling public is quicker to be angry than they are to be understanding. And I don't know why that's happening. But people like us here on this group, we all have the ability to change that tide. So change that tide in your spaces. Dakota, thank you very much for sharing that. And know you have an undying amount of support right here on this call and from all of us on the panel. And congratulations to you and your fiance. Your wedding will be a party to remember, I am sure, once it's able to happen. So congratulations. Anne, would you like to share an experience with us?
Sure, that's tough to follow. I have to kind of collect myself, but sorry, Dakota, that your journey's been rough. I'm the old girl on the panel, I'd like to say. So I came out in the 1980s at the beginning of the AIDS crisis. It was a very difficult time, but at that time, the gay and lesbian community, as it was known then, was not really, did not really work well together. And through this crisis, good always comes out of crisis. And through this crisis, the community bonded together and paved the way to be inclusive for all oppressed communities, and has, as you've seen, evolved from, you know, a small pride parade honoring and demonstrating the Stonewall riots to something that is inclusive for all people. And I'm proud in this Pride Month to be part of this community that is not just inclusive for the LGBTQ plus community, but for all oppressed and marginalized people of the United States and the world. And so that's kind of mine. And I'm happy to be one of the 18,000 grandfathered marriages that Gavin Newsom allowed from the state of California. So I was lucky to grow up in the Bay Area, a more inclusive place, but even then it was hard to come out in the 80s. And I knew a lot of friends that were not supported. And we've come a long way, but just like Brian said, kindness and compassion for your fellow man is really the important thing here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne, and thank you for being a trailblazer back then in setting the stage to make it easier for people like me, for other folks who came after you, who had a little bit of an easier path to forge as they lived authentically in their lives and didn't have to fight the same struggles to be able to legally marry the person that they love. So thank you for being a part of that. And again, thank you for setting the stage for my journey and the journeys of others to be a little bit easier. Folks, that's just the story of 5 people right here. There are hundreds of thousands of other stories that exist within the LGBTQ community, all of which are different, all of which are meaningful, all of which have deep rooted emotion problems and things that still tear people down. So get to know people in your circles, get to know people at your airports, get to know people in your life who maybe you didn't take the opportunity to get to know before. Everyone's story is interesting and everyone's story can help build that toolkit that I talked about. Sorry, I bring in a lot of aviation terms since I am an airline pilot. Toolkits are a big thing to break down Swiss cheese where safety issues are going through. So I'll keep talking about that toolkit, but make sure your toolkit is filled with the stories of people around you who can make you just that much greater of a learned person, if you will, through life. So thanks for listening. Again, any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box or hit the reactions and raise your hand. I'm going to go into some things that might be more appropriate, are going to be more appropriate for things you can bring back to your spaces that you work in. We talk about being inclusive, and inclusive workspaces are such an important aspect of the promotion of happy and productive work environments. So I wanted to kick this to you, Rick. Rick, if you could share some of the best practices which you have seen through your work on different projects across the country that you've worked on that have built inclusive workspaces that you've been in.
Awesome, thanks. And so with that question, I'm going to expand on it a little bit, only because we talk about workspaces. In my projects, I worked at over like 100 airports in about 20 something other different states. And you don't always see behind the curtain of what actually is going on there, what their policies are, what their procedures are. And we heard this for the whole hour leading up to this, it's about the respect. And you can, when you see respective work environments, you can tell what's going on there, and it's a reflection on the culture where you are. And it's not the same everywhere. I mean, for example, I'm in Utah right now, where have a public meeting in a church tonight. And if people ask me what I did today, I was on a virtual conference. I may not elaborate exactly what the conference was about. And the hotel breakfast this morning, Billy Graham and the 700 Club is playing on the TV, and the hotel breakfast. Not exactly the most welcoming environment, but that's the reality of where I am. So that it varies, because there's other places. One of my other clients up in Massachusetts, we were talking about a famous drag queen, Bianca Del Rio, for example, and we bonded over that. So where you're at and where you work is very different, but I will say it's all about respect. And it's interesting, as a white male, it's normally not one of the boxes that you check in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion on the surface. I will say we are privy to many conversations that probably wouldn't fly outside of the white male circle. And we are listening, I am listening in ways that probably most people would not expect. And so when you hear different things and people talk certain ways, and it's a way that you wouldn't talk in terms of another group, that tells me a lot about what kind of a work environment it is, where you work and what you do. And so I would encourage, if you hear these different conversations of, like, would you be talking the same way? Would you have the same conversation if the group was a little bit different? And that's very hard for the aviation group, because it is such a, again, a male-dominated society. But catch yourself. I challenge you, if you hear conversations occurring, whether it be, no matter what it's about, but if you wouldn't be talking the same way without somebody else there, that's an opportunity to learn and to grow. But I will say that is a reflection, and that's something that you see, and it's different in the Northeast versus the Southeast. I will say some of the more conservative states, there are things that I hear that would be horrifying, and things that you definitely do not hear up in places like the Northeast chapter, and it's unfortunate but true.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Anne, I'm going to kick it to you. As a leader in aviation consulting, what practices have you put in place for your team, as well as for your clients, to make them feel valued and accepted?
No, that's such a hard, well, first of all, I'm a very small shop. So, but you know, the health plan, the hierarchical structure I've set up for my firm is all inclusive and provides benefits to all. As far as, you know, dealing with clients over the years, my thing is, you know, you treat everybody with kindness and respect, and that's how you move through the world, and you leave a gentle footprint. You know, I've marched a lot. I've been militant in my 20s. You know, I'm not there yet. I'm not there anymore, obviously, but, you know, it's just really about respect. As you said, Brian, it's all about treating people with respect and knowing that you are all different in some way, but we all have something common that we can work through. And obviously there are difficult people that you deal with, and whether your clients be in the North, the West, the South, I mean, you do face issues along the way. And again, it's just about being respectful and kind as you move through the world. And I can't stress that enough. And I'm glad we're returning to more kindness in the world. And I hope that is the way of the future.
Awesome, thank you. And you said something that struck me right as you said it, finding something common. I think commonality that you can find with people that you don't necessarily have matching views with, if you can find a bit of common ground, whether that be on something that you love in life. One of my passions in life is wine. Me and my husband love wine. If you can find a commonality with someone who loves wine, you can talk about that, and that can really break some barriers down, break the ice, and get you to conversations that may not have been comfortable in the beginning, but you have some sort of common ground now, and then you can start to break down some of those barriers and walk away from conversations that bring about positive learning in areas that you probably couldn't broach before you found that commonality. So thank you for mentioning that. Something that's probably really important across the workspaces for those of you joining us on the call today are employee resource groups. They can be called many different things depending on where you are. I've heard them called CRGs, ERGs, BRGs, business resource groups, crew member resource groups. Here at JetBlue, everyone's a crew member. So employee resource groups not only bring validation and support for employees who partake in them, but they also provide valuable feedback and guidance for leaders of their companies that they exist at. So Dakota, I wanted to check with you in your experience, whether that be at Jacobs or past places that you've worked, has a company's ERG had any influence in you wanting to work for that company? Have you actually sought out information about it before making a decision on joining an employer?
I wasn't specifically seeking it out, but Jacobs had sponsored Denver Pride. And so while I was walking around, Jacobs' logo was up there with the Prism. Our employee network's called Prism. And so I saw that, I was like, that's really awesome. Not very common in the aviation or in the engineering field, especially construction field. Our company's open to the LGBT community. And so going through school, I didn't know what company I wanted to work for. Kiewit's name came up a lot of a great employer. Everybody that I talked to that worked for Kiewit was like, yeah, it's a bro place. Like all the bros hang out. It's a great place to be. And I'm like, that's not where I want to be then. Nothing bad about Kiewit if you work for them or if they have any of your contracts, just something that what was said to me is not something that I wanted to be a part of. And so that was kind of their culture. But walking around Pride and seeing the Pride flag in Jacob's name, I was like, that is a company that I would like to work for. And so having an employee resource group, once again, it's called Prism. Having Prism, it was something that drew me to the company. And I started as an intern. I've been with them ever since. And I don't really foresee myself leaving anytime soon because they're so open-minded to all aspects of life. With that said, after I started, I was leaving in December and they had a Christmas tree out in the lobby. Everybody's like, Christmas tree is Christian. You have to be able to support it all. And one of our other employee network groups is called One World. And so right next to the Christmas tree was a menorah and a Star of David. And so we had actually all the religions kind of pieced together in our lobby area, just encompassing everybody. So inclusion is a big thing. It's not just the LGBT community that has to be included. It's all walks of life, all aspects. It doesn't matter Black, Hispanic, because we have those employee networks. We have disabled employee networks. So like it's inclusivity of all. And I feel like Pride Month really gets the biggest inclusion of all because we have a month that we really focus on inclusion. But I just want to kind of point out that it is inclusive for everybody.
Thanks for sharing that, Dakota. And a follow-up, do you think, since you're part of Prism within Jacobs, do you feel that your participation or I guess the voice of the Prism group within Jacobs has been a driver for positive change within the company?
I would say yes. Every June, Jacobs will put the Pride logo on our LinkedIn. All of our public entities has a Pride logo for the month of June. And that was definitely a driver that the Prism group and Prism leadership pushed forward. We hung up a Pride flag on our flagpole and actually took down the Jacobs flag for the month of June, which not a lot of companies are willing to take down their own name to put up a Pride flag. So that was definitely something really cool to do. Also, our executive leadership board really backs it up. And each executive leadership member from Steve Dimitro, who's our CEO, is a part of an employee network group as kind of the sponsor that really looks at who is, or to make sure that all diversity gets a name on the board. And so I would definitely say that we do have a lot of our leadership buying into it. I don't really want to make it sound like they're buying in, but it's definitely a positive change that we see as leadership has more inclusivity.
And that's so important. Just we keep talking about it, visibility and a feeling of inclusion. And take note for those of you here who are leaders at airports who maybe you don't have a Pride flag hanging up at your airport for Pride Month. First, I'll say it doesn't always have to only be up during the month of June. Pride and LGBTQ plus inclusion exists past June 30th and before June 1st. We'll talk about that a little bit in just a second. But maybe just putting up a flag. You can get a flag on Amazon for $6 right now. So you can order a flag to your location, put it up at your airport. You have no clue the impact. Well, actually, maybe you're gaining a clue now. The impact that might have for not only patrons of your airport, but also employees at your location. So it obviously had a big impact on Dakota and kicked off his career with Jacobs, not only as an intern, but going on further, just for seeing the inclusion practices that were held by Jacobs at a Pride event in Denver. So great story and great input there, Dakota. Marcia, I know that you have incredible experience at your company's Jedi Council, which when I read that at first, I thought it sounded very Star Wars-esque, kind of cool, the Jedi Council, but standing for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. First and foremost, can you tell us about Jedi, how you participate, what you do within Jedi, and then I'll have a follow-up, so you can go with that.
Awesome. Yes. So I've been very lucky enough to join an organization that has seen the value in pushing forward and creating a more inclusive space. As a part of my role here, not only building a vertical practice in the state of Florida, I'm also leading our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council. We haven't launched it officially, but we're working on it within the next month, probably after Pride. And the reality is we've created kind of an inclusive committee. We, as an organization of 550 employees, mostly in Texas, Florida, and the Midwest, realize that our diversity is not where we want it to be. And so we've created an opportunity where we have representation in every office on the committee and representation in every department in our organization. So it's a volunteer commitment for people that are in education of 1 through 10 of where their diversity and inclusion expertise is not necessarily not everybody involved is very high. We're all still learning. And the reality is we've decided to create an inclusion committee called the Jedi Council to really help the education of our employees, to be a resource and to also help shape the conversations. Knowing there's been a lot of employee resource groups that have maybe divided among affinities, whether it's your ethnicity, you're part of the LGBT community. Us as an organization have decided not to separate and create that just based on proximity of our size and the employees that are in our groups. The volunteers are very diverse, and we have representation among. And that's been very healthy for our conversations, to be able to be in a room just like this, virtually mostly, and be able to have real conversation on what's going on in our offices and how we can help improve. So some of our strategy is kind of divide and conquer with our initiatives. And we've kind of broken it up by a community outreach initiative, a marketing initiative, human resources, business development, and just kind of a leadership. So everybody has kind of aspects of where they can help some of these initiatives, and we're trying to activate the platform of our company. We have an internal green room that we use to kind of share. It's almost like our information overload Facebook page, sharing projects, and it's really cool to see some of the engagement that our employees have. We want to be known as an innovation company that does engineering. And so it's really cool with some of our innovation practices. The Jedi Council was formed by 3 employees that pitched in our innovation challenge that we needed a diversity and inclusion committee as of last year. And so leadership took that out of our innovation challenge and decided to make it a reality. And I'm very grateful to be a part of that. My expertise just has been a personal passion of mine, and being able to come into the organization, help lead it, has been very rewarding. So it's in a growing process. We kicked off with Pride Month as one of the first initiatives, and the company's never recognized Pride in 49 years. So I feel like that's a huge accomplishment. The logo change, and I was not a part of that decision. It just happened overnight, and I was completely surprised to have a logo. It has made a huge impact in less than 2 weeks with employees within the organization already. So I'm very hopeful and excited that, like I said, just having a handful of people take the initiative, and to help grow, each of these task force that'll have individual leaders, 3 or 4 people within our Jedi Council. And we kind of use the Jedi as a force of nature, someone who is super enlightened as a Jedi Master, right? And so bringing on Padawan learners and Jedi Knights and kind of bringing up everybody's education about and having conversations like this is going to help everybody create a more inclusive environment. And so that's one of the cool ways that we've decided to kind of take this on. And we're very excited to see what happens over the next 5 years as a part of our strategic plan.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Marcia, and thank you for the work that you're doing there within the Jedi Council and at WGI. As they say, time flies when you're having fun or when you're learning, and it's already 1 minute past when this was supposed to end, but there's one more topic. I asked Appy if I can cover it, and she said briefly, we've got to dive into it really quick, and that is the importance of allies. Allies are such an important piece within the LGBTQAI+ spectrum. They are such strong voices who have a tremendous impact on the acceptance of those within the LGBTQ+ community. They're great voices for the community itself. So instead of going one by one, I will open up this question. What tools, this is the question for the panel, what tools can we provide our allies to better equip them to support the LGBTQ+ community?
Lunch and Learns is something that Jacobs does, and I think it's something that the LGBT community provides great resources for our allies. Hearing personal stories, struggles that we go through, rewards that we win, all of that information gives more tools in the toolkit, as you like to kind of put it, for our allies. Like, look, I have a personal experience with somebody who's told this story. This is how they live. This is what they struggle with, and this is what they love to celebrate. And so the more Lunch and Learns that the community can host, or the more educational series that we can provide for people to understand topics that the LGBT community is struggling with, including legislative, is definitely a big piece that the community could do to support our allies.
I'll jump in, and I honestly think it's just making yourselves available and being a resource for folks. Our human resources manager, Farland Johnson, her and I are close, and so when we have a new employee come on, and in this particular, we had the situation where someone came on and had a non-binary spouse, and we were talking about that, and like, how do we do the employee welcome and the bio when we talk about these things? And what was interesting is we started talking about it, and we realized that our employee manual had too many pronouns in it. And at the end of our conversation, it basically was like, oh my God, well, I need to rewrite the manual. And it was completely scrubbed of any genders and pronouns as a result of this conversation that we had. And that's where it starts. And it's something it's always going to be a journey, but I think us as the community, we need to make ourselves available and be a resource. And it's something, like you said, I don't know everything. So if I put myself, everyone knows, even in the industry, after the last time we did this session as well, I got so many questions and asked, like, what about this? Or what about that? How do I deal with this? How do I deal with this situation in the workplace? What do I do in this situation? Even with a colleague, they'll come up, and if I don't know it, I'll refer them or say I don't know it and say, this is a great resource for you, and I'll field it to somebody else. But honestly, that's the best thing we need to do, is we need to kind of be I'll use an aviation term here, we need to be a rotating beacon for these topics as they come into land at our airports. How's that?
Listen, with that rotating beacon analogy, I can certainly land the plane. So Thank you.
It'll be a rainbow rotating
that.
beacon for you. So we'll put all the colors on that beacon, and whoever can draw that logo up for an employee resource group for an airport.
We'll have to talk to the FAA about getting that added to the FAR AIM, but I like the thought process there. Anne or Marcia, anything to add on the ally front? And I know that I'm getting the look, so we're way over time.
One statement. I think allies are going to be the people that change this world. It won't be the LGBTQ community. There's not enough of people that are out and are active the way that this panel is active, or the way that maybe other people. So the reality is we need you. We need every white Caucasian male in the aviation world, being able to be a champion. And so one of the ways I feel like is to remember that each person has a story, and each person comes from a different walk of life. And I think that I like to think that there's a lot more people in our community that can come and present to you and communicate to you from a place of compassion, the way that Brian talked about, and the way that and where it comes from me. However, there's a lot of individuals in our community that have been hurt and triggered. And so sometimes they're educating and being an activist from a place of anger, right? From a place of just trials and tribulations. And so just being aware that there's a spectrum within our community, and the more you can get from us, the panel here that are willing to share and to pour our hearts out to you, is the best way to find those people in your organization that are willing and to utilize them as resources. But knowing that there may be others that are coming from a place of anger and coming from a place where, you know, they're going to get very passionate and loud. And I mean, I'm Latina, so like I talk with my hands and I can, but the reality is at the end of the day, like I have grown up in a world where I've been able to navigate it very successfully and find a way to connect, whether it's wine, I drink scotch, you know, whatever. But the reality is that, you know, there's a way to connect, and finding those ways as a leader in your organizations, finding a way to connect those dots is the fastest way to learn. So I applaud everybody here because I feel like everybody that is on this call is already activated as an ally. And I appreciate each and every one of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcia. Anne, did you have anything to add? If not, no worries.
I'm just going to say, you know, information's the key, getting it out there, you know, being visible where possible, educating, and, you know, being a role model. And again, the way you move through the world is all important. The footprint you leave is all important, but it's really about events like this. And thank you so much for hosting this event, because this is all about information and educating. Because, you know, if you don't know somebody, you don't know them, right? So it's really good to have these kind of events. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you to the entire panel here, Marcia, Dakota, Rick, and Anne. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your story. So many more questions to cover. We could probably spend another 2 hours. We could probably spend 2 to 3 days on this topic, getting to know each other, getting to learn, and continuing to add to that toolkit. A big thank you to AAAE for hosting this event. Love to come back and talk to you all again. Love to come to your airports. If you see a JetBlue pilot walking around, it might be me. Stop me, say, hey, what's up? And I'd love to meet you all in person at some point. So thank you again. Thank you for being allies. Thank you for being activists in the community. And remember what I said, Pride Month does not end on June 30th, though it does officially. LGBTQ inclusion goes all year round. So please continue to support that across your spaces. Api, back to you. This is a record. I'm only 8 minutes over time. Thanks all.
Wow. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing, being vulnerable and sharing your experiences with us. I didn't realize I needed this today, a tissue box, but I did. And Dakota, you have our full support. I'm glad that you found your home at Jacobs. I hope that all of us can say we found our home wherever we work, and that's a true testament, right, to the workplace that we all want to belong to. So Brenda, Kathy, Brian, Dakota, Rick, Anne, Marcia, thank you so much for being part of Northeast Chapter's event. I think the Northeast Chapter is trailblazing with some of the initiatives that we're doing here when it comes to DE&I. Absolutely right. This doesn't stop in June. We're going to make sure that we continue having the discussion about LGBTQ and everything under the DE&I umbrella 365 days a year. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Melinda to close it out.
All right. Well, thank you, Api. I know that our Northeast Chapter President, Carl Braley, has joined us, and I'd like to give him an opportunity for one comment before I close.
Thank you. I apologize for being late. Work gets in the way. I can't say thank you enough. You are all the reason that this chapter is successful. To quote Marcia, the takeaway is the best we can be is be the best person we possibly can. And there's so many times we get invited into different roles, and no matter what the role is, we have to remember to be the best person we possibly can, which includes being friends with everyone, because you're so important to this chapter and you are so much our friends. We are your allies. I know I present myself as a 50-year-old white male, but we all have stories behind the scene regardless. And the most important story is we're human, we're people, we love each other regardless. And because you're our friends, we're your allies. And again, thank you for making the chapter such a success story. With that, Melinda, thank you so much.
Very good. Well, thank you finally to our panelists for bringing our chapter this great information. Thank you to our generous sponsor, DY Consultants, for their continued financial support. And thank you to you, our members, for your participation and engagement in our chapter. I want to remind you that we do have the Northeast Chapter Annual Conference in Burlington, Vermont this August. We will be having our first ever DE&I Awards, and registration is now open. With that being said, have a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for participating.
Outstanding. Thank you so much.
And see you all in Burlington.
See you in Burlington.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great. Thank
I'll be waiting for my ticket.
Brian's going to fly us all up there on JetBlue.
Oh,
We're
there
gonna
you
have
go.
to connect in JFK, but we'll make it happen.
Oh, gee.
Brian, thank you so much. You were awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
for
you, Brian.
joining us. And
No,
hopefully
thank you all.
we'll have a chance with the Northeast chapter and or even AAAE to do, join forces with NGPA sometime in the future.
And if anyone's in Provincetown, Massachusetts, we return to our very first NGPA in-person event, September 16th through the 20th. We'll be in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Registration for that event will be opening somewhere around July 15th. We're kind of trying to race to put it together since we've had everything on hold for a while, but check it out, ngpa.org. We'd love to see you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Enjoy it.